Hi there, this is Cindy Lou with CHRO Mastermind Groups, and I'm joined today with Brian Walker. I'll have Brian introduce himself in a minute. But today we're going to talk about style switching and how that helps you basically build more influence and trust. And Brian has this nickname of CEO Whisper that some of his peers have given him. And we're going to jump into how he does that because I think all CHROs could definitely benefit from it. But Brian, first, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and Alcogen.
Thank you, Cindy. Hi, everybody. My background. I grew up in between Las Vegas and Mexico, and I've had an extensive career in international business. I worked for Walmart for 18 years, where I had expat assignments in Mexico, Indonesia, Canada, mainland China, and Hong Kong. After all those years, I left Walmart. I went to work for Kimberly-Clark, where I ran HR for everything outside of the U.S. And then joined Sally Beauty for a short time as CHRO, and now I've been here with Alcogen for 6.5, going on 7 years now, where we're a global specialty manufacturer specializing in high temperature insulation products like 1,000 degrees Celsius and higher, filtration products, especially for specialty filtration like AGM batteries and clean room filtration applications, and with a lot of other stuff, but that's mostly what we do. So it's great to talk to you, Cindy. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had quite the globe-trotting background in your past. And when we were talking earlier, you talked about style switching. Can you dive into that a little bit more? I think this is such an interesting topic, and I love how you've worked on that for yourself.
Yeah, yeah. I remember, I grew up overseas, and I actually lived in Argentina as a young man too. I grew up overseas, and I innately knew that when you go from one place to another, things change. In fact, I learned that very hard lesson when I moved from Mexico to Indonesia, and everything I had done in Mexico failed. And I like, what is going on? And I remember starting to buy books on culture and reading them. And what I went through this learning process where cultures are different, right? I had a lot of us know this now, but I spent the rest of my career, this I was relatively young when that happened, and spent the rest of my career trying to study and understand how to switch, and I call it style switching, right? How to switch styles when you go from one culture to another. And I had a lot of, even today, I have the opportunity to go from one country to another and deal with people from one culture to another multiple times a day sometimes. And I mean, there was a time I was going from country to country every week, and you just couldn't, I could go to Mexico, for example, and warm up to the way Mexicans do things and all the warmth they have and the energy, and then you go to Asia, and it's collectivism, and you can't, face and don't ask somebody a very specific question, ask it to the group. And I had to learn a lot of different techniques, and uh, and so what I learned was that every time you deal with somebody from a different culture, it's not disingenuous to change the way you work with them. In fact, it's desirable to be able to switch styles and say, I know what works here and I know what works there, and so let me do it differently with you. It doesn't always work, but it is effective. And I think over the years I did it so much that now, even in my day-to-day life, when I move from one executive to another executive, for example, I don't have a problem adapting to the style of that executive because I've just done it so long, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I love that. It reminds me of consultative selling when they talked about being the chameleon, right, to your client or prospect to make them feel more comfortable, but you're taking it to a whole different level. Well, so let's talk about that. You've been given this nickname of CEO Whisper. Tell me what are the things that play into that? And I know you had to do some sort of research with folks to find out because it's hard to see what you would do naturally. But what do people say?
Yeah, I knew I'd been given a nickname, and so then when we decided we were going to talk about this, I really had to go ask people like, okay, why do people say that about me? I kind of know though. Look, the term CEO whisper comes from my peers because they started to come to trust me to come and say, hey, Brian, we should go talk to our boss, our CEO, about X, Y, or Z. Usually it's about a sensitive subject, maybe something that he wouldn't take very well, or maybe something bad news, or who knows what, but
Mhm.
usually sensitive. And and I don't always take that like no, and like what they mean by we was me, because they want me to go pave the road for them to for me to soften the blow with the CEO. And so I often just push back and say, no, I'm not going to do that. You do that. If you
Mhm.
want, I'll go with you, you know, um, or maybe here's some advice or thoughts about how we approach it. But sometimes I do. Sometimes I have the opportunity. I do spend a lot of time with my boss, or I have over the, I have always made it my mission in my job. I believe my number one priority is to work with a CEO, and any job I'm in, right? There is to work with, of course, to help them be the best they can be as a leader.
Mhm.
That's my primary job,
Yeah.
right? And so I dedicate a lot of time spending a lot of time with them, and I'll go sometimes and say, hey, I heard this or I heard that. I do it subtly. I don't do it. I don't throw people under the bus. And that allows the CEO then to take time to process. Sometimes temperatures rise because it's a sensitive topic. Sometimes we just have a good conversation and he thinks through things. Sometimes he doesn't say anything and then the conversation comes up and it
Mhm.
normally goes well. But I think my team, my peers, have over the years come to appreciate the ability for me um, to help maneuver through difficult conversations, not always ahead of time either, sometimes in the heat of the moment,
Mhm.
um, to be able to calm a, a storm down a little bit. I think
Mhm.
that's what I mean by it.
Yeah. So I guess, being able to speak truth to power for many HR leaders is a challenge. And it's something that I see sort of across the board. CEOs tend to be driver type personalities, right? And I think that in general, CEOs can have very strong personalities. I know that I had a little bit of that reputation myself at one point. So having somebody that you really trust, that you can count on to tell you the truth is so, so important, yet it's so challenging. How did you build that kind of trust with your CEOs in the past?
Yeah, I just say, and I hope I don't get in trouble for this. I often say to be a CEO, you have to be an SOB. And what I mean by that is that CEOs you have to have a certain personality to make the tough decisions and do the tough things that you have to do as a CEO. Otherwise, you can't make it. And there's a certain personality type that makes it, and it comes out in different ways. I know a lot of CEOs who are very nice people, but they're also very intense. They're always very intense, and um, so the building trust is a really good question because it's hard. It's hard to describe sometimes like this, but flavor of salt, right? But look, number one, I would say it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, and you start out with positive intent, and you work through challenges. I would say in my case, trust comes from I spend a lot of time. I try to spend quality time. I listen a lot. I allow my CEOs to vent when they need to vent. I don't try to feed bad behavior, right? In other words, if they go off and start saying things, and people say things sometimes, and what I try to do is create a safe space
Hmm.
for them to say whatever they need to say. In front of me is better than in front of everybody else if it's going to be spicy, let's say. And then normally that calms things down. It allows them to process, to say what they need to say. I also then give feedback. So my CEO or my CEOs would say, I think if you ask them that, number one, I listen, and number two, they believe that I tell them what needs to be said.
Mm-hmm.
I don't spend more time talking than listening, though. I'm very conscientious about listening and making sure I hear, I let them say, I let them articulate. Um, and but then I also, it's usually subtly.
Mm-hmm.
Usually my approach is very subtle in terms of consider this, consider that. I heard this. Sometimes in a style switching way, uh, I will raise the temperature myself and do it a little more strongly. And because I don't do it often, it tends to be very effective when I do.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I do think number one, the listening more than talking is so important, right? We used to have a rule of thumb in consultative selling, which is like 80-20. Like the client needs to be talking 80% of the time. Otherwise, you don't know the answers, right, to the test. I also think that the trust is not just that they know you're going to keep things in confidence or between the two of you, but also that you're willing to tell them the truth, that you're brave enough, you're courageous enough to tell them the truth. And to me, that built a lot of trust. I had an awesome COO and she would always tell me the truth. She's just wired that way, even though she's fairly young. And it made me trust her more because I'm like, okay, I don't have to guess at what she's thinking. Right. And she was also a very good listener too. Yeah.
I do have to balance it, right?
Hmm.
Because I tell my boss the truth all the time, and I'm very transparent. This is what I hear. This is what I know. But I also have to protect the relationship I have with my peers and with
Hmm.
other employees, right? Sometimes I hear things, and you have to keep confidentiality, and I say, and I have a very good relationship with my boss. Sometimes I tell him everything, and I say, but you can't let anybody know I told you that. Like even last week, I told my boss, I said, I know this thing. Here's how I know it. You can't let the other person know how you know this. You have to go discover it yourself. And he did. He's very effective,
Yeah.
there's a reason he's a CEO. And but you have to, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes I say, look, I can't tell you where I heard that because I can't throw people on the bus. And he understands that too. He understands because we have trust, right?
That's smart. That CEO role is so lonely. I know that I often say the CHRO role is lonely, but the CEO, I mean, you've got this board, right, that you have to be ready and on for. And not always, boards aren't always there to give advice. They're there to govern, right? And then you've got a whole team that's looking to you, and it gets really lonely. So I know that I've led teams in the past where I never didn't have that inner circle built yet, and you just feel like you're in your head, your own head all the time. But to have somebody that you trust and that you can turn to is that's a gift.
Yeah, and by the way, I totally agree with the point. CEO is a very lonely job, and that part of my job is to help it be less lonely, right?
Yeah.
Uh, as much as I can.
Yeah. So what I heard from you when you're in those moments, heated moments, is that you're calm in the storm, take time to listen, you let them vent, you're subtle in your feedback, but occasionally you'll turn up the heat if needed to make sure it's really effective. So I think these are great things to keep in mind for up and coming HR leaders, but also CHROs who are struggling with speaking truth to power.
Yeah, I look, I think at some point I learned as a CHRO, that is the job, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That, what do I deliver? What does our talent process look like? What does our performance management process look like? How are we doing the work of HR? That's really important. And that builds trust too, right? I have trust with my boss and my bosses because we deliver.
Right.
But that's my job there, is to hire a team that can do the work and to coach and lead that team. When I find myself doing those things and I'm spending too much time doing those things, like I would never tell my CEO, I don't have time to go spend with you because I'm working on this other really important thing. That defeats the purpose of my job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Uh,
How do you get the time? I mean, this is so hard. Like sometimes I talk to CHROs and it's like maybe I get to meet with my boss every other week or once a month, so how do you get that time?
Well, interestingly, I mean, we used to work together in Buffalo, and then we opened this office in Dallas, and I moved back because I used to live here before. And look, when we were in Buffalo together, we spoke every day.
Mhm.
During COVID, he called me every day. This is the trust thing, right? He literally called me every day, and because he was lonely, he wanted to talk to somebody, and we talked about everything. When I moved here, it was hard because he stayed in Buffalo, and so for the first year, we had to find a new rhythm,
Mm.
and it required me to travel back to Buffalo quite a bit. I had to actually just go be there,
Mhm.
and he came here sometimes, but now he comes a lot more often. Now he kind of splits his time between the two places, and when he's going to be in town, which is about half the time now, I just clear my calendar,
Mhm.
and my time's dedicated to being with him. I go to his meetings.
Mhm.
I am with him, not all the time, but most of the time.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the time, if he's traveling somewhere else, I'll often go with him to wherever he's going. And we travel together. If he's going to visit plants in Europe, I'll go to Europe with him,
Yeah.
and I don't force myself in. He invites me because
Right.
he knows I want to be there and he wants me to be there.
And going back to your comment of it doesn't happen in a day, right? It's not just over time, but it's also the amount of time during the years, right? It's not just, hey, we meet once a quarter. It's having real face time.
I couldn't imagine having a scenario where I meet with him once every 2 weeks, or there's a schedule where I go and I have an agenda, and we don't. I know, and look, I know there's people that operate that way, but that just I think that could work in terms of managing the function,
Mhm.
but it doesn't work in terms of managing my boss, right? Or helping him to be the best leader he can be.
But I'll tell you, Brian, what that tells me is that he finds value in the time with you as well, right? So it's not you having to beg to get on the calendar. It's that executive, whether it's the CEO or they're finding value in that time. And that's something that we used to talk about is make sure you leave after every meeting, make sure that you've left that person better and that they have gained some value, not and that only comes with you asking a lot of questions and letting them talk versus you doing all the talking. So yeah, I
Yeah.
love it. Any parting advice for our audience?
I I don't know what else to say. This has been a difficult topic because I had to really think and reflect about what do I do, and but I couldn't. I just can't emphasize enough. It's the time invested in the relationship, right, in the trust building.
Yeah.
And I know that's hard to define trust, and it's different. Every individual is
Mhm.
different, but uh, I I don't think there's any other solution except for just to put the time in.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I have one more thing that we were just in our mastermind group, and what's said in the mastermind stays in the mastermind, but I'm not going to reveal who said this, but I will reveal your advice, which I thought was great. And it was about giving, a C-suite executive feedback that they needed to hear. And I think your advice, Brian, was like you need to switch stances, right? Like if you've been doing kind of the same message and it's not working, switch your stance. So I think that is
Style switch, right?
that style switch. That's right. All right. Brian, thank you so much for your generosity and sharing your wisdom and experiences with our audience. I know they'll really appreciate it. Would it be all right if we put your LinkedIn in the show notes so that people can connect with you?
Absolutely.
All right.
And thank you, Cindy. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Brian.